If you want a sustainable strategy for programs within vulnerable communities and emerging markets, you must disrupt a system.
What do you think shaped that philosophy for you?
It wasn't about walking in and saying, here's the money. They knew what they wanted to do, but what they needed was someone to help put those resources together. They needed a bridge, right? And I don't want that to hold people back. I have 3 daughters, and I talk with them quite a lot because that held me back, right? The worry about what others would think.
Let's just go back to the beginning of that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share with us what really sparked your passion?
I was placed with an African tribal community along the banks of the Amazon River, and I wanted that experience. What I had was an amazing group of 600 villagers who welcomed me like part of the family. They taught me the language, especially the children. They taught me how to live. And I have a child walk up to me and say, Madame, thank you so much for coming.
Hello there. Welcome to the Lead Mindset podcast, where we dive deep into the journeys of those making a significant impact in the world of service based leadership, characterized by happiness, purpose, and making people feel valued. I'm your host, Denise Hilliman, and today we are extremely honored to have Gretchen Villegas with us, a beacon of social impact and a visionary leader in the nonprofit sector. Gretchen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Denise. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, Gretchen, it's a real pleasure to have you here. So, for the audience who may not know who you are, please let us know who you are. But I'm going to give you a challenge before you answer that question. Can you describe your leadership in 3 words for me?
Oh, in 3 words. Servant, curious, supportive.
Service, curious, support. Now, against that backdrop, can you describe how people would experience you as a leader? So, in describing yourself as a leader, how are people going to experience you with those 3 words?
They will experience me asking them many, many questions. So I'll be very curious about what they're thinking and what they're intending to do when they carry out their tasks. I will be asking them how I can support them when they carry out their tasks. And I will be wanting to know how I can serve their needs better as they grow, right, into their functions and what they feel they need to learn more about as they grow further into their careers.
Well, that sounds really exciting. I would love to be in your leadership space. So tell us a little bit about the spaces you've worked in and where people have had the honor to experience your leadership. Tell us a little bit about you and your background and the spaces you've worked in.
Well, I've been really blessed with the spaces I've been allowed to work because I have learned, I believe, from the very best. I was given an opportunity to live with my family and work in Latin America and East and Southern Africa for almost 16 years. And when I was there, I was able to work with the local staff implementing global development projects, mainly funded by the US government with global foreign aid money, but also with other partners like, the World Bank, like other corporations and foundations that were always supporting funds as well, but really working with the more vulnerable communities. But what was amazing about those experiences was that when I showed up, I had to learn, right? And so my classroom, my learning was really on the job. It was allowing the staff to be my, my peer support, really, right? So I was the leader, but I was the one asking the cultural questions. I was asking how things were done. I was asking how the accounting was done, how you would ask the government for support, which were the partners who could support us in our travel, logistics, talking to the farmers, and all of that. And so, what I learned along the way was it really was a great way to learn how to be of service, right, to the
Mm.
staff who you're working with, because I needed the staff to teach me along the way. And so it was a great learning journey. And even though culture is different, the process is the same, right? So going into Africa, the culture is very different, right? Languages are very different. But what was amazing about the process was it was the same. The first learning is that you can never assume you know exactly how to do something, but what you can assume is that you have to ask certain questions. So I think that was the most amazing part about that. And I had that experience before I came back to the United States. And so I was a leader using service as kind of my way forward in leadership because that was my foundation.
I think that's the beauty about service leadership. And that's such a great experience you've had, having the courage, and it's really making yourself vulnerable, isn't it? To leave the comfort of your of culture, your home, and then go among a culture that you're not familiar with. And that's where the power of asking questions
Mm,
really kicks in. But it only becomes valuable when people are at the center, when your whole aim is to be of service to others. So I know, Gretchen, that you have been a formidable force in championing social change and inspiring leadership in the nonprofit world. So let's just go back to the beginning of that.
mhm.
Can you share with us what really sparked your passion for social impact and leadership in the nonprofit sector?
Oh, right out of my undergraduate degree, I went directly into the Peace Corps. And so the Peace Corps, for those who don't know, is um, a volunteer opportunity. You must have now a 4-year degree. It's actually very competitive. And you don't get to choose where you go. But I was placed in Suriname, South America. Um, it was actually not speaking Spanish, right? It was not the Latin culture. I was placed with an African tribal community along the banks of the Amazon River. They were people who had come over as slaves from West Africa, and when the slaves were set free, went into the Amazon rainforest. And I wanted that experience because I really wanted the perspective of what it was like to, really live differently, right? To have the perspective, a more global perspective. And I wanted to know, was global development, what was it? Like, is that something I really wanted to do, right? I had traveled some. And so I went for 2 years and I showed up. I did not understand the language. I had no running water, no electricity, but what I had was an amazing group of 600 villagers who welcomed me like part of the family. They taught me the language, especially the children. They taught me how to live, buckets of water on my head and washing my dishes in the river and helping to build my own thatch hut uh, house so that I had somewhere to sleep. And what I realized as a result of that experience was global development was not about coming in with the answers. It wasn't about walking in and saying, here's the money. It was about partnering with vulnerable communities that did not have access to the resources, but they knew what they needed, right? They knew they didn't have access to the knowledge or the funding or the resources that they needed, right? And they knew what they wanted to do. But what they needed was someone to help put those resources together. They needed a bridge, right? A bridge to access whatever that resource was that they needed. And so that is when I realized that that is what I wanted to do. That's what I
To
wanted
be
to
that
do.
conduit
Yeah, I wanted to
to them.
be the conduit. It wasn't just about an administrator of money. It wasn't just about, oh, I have to come and tell you what you need, right? It wasn't that I had to have the right answer. It was about being present. It was about listening. It was about respecting, right? And really letting vulnerable communities lead and being a resource to help them map out what they want to accomplish and figure out what are the resources that are needed and put together a plan, which is a proposal, right? And then figure out, okay, together, how are we going to bring those resources? Is it in kind resources? Is it expertise? Is it money that we need? And then how do we move forward? And then those sustainable impacts will come, right? And that's when I decided that's what I wanted to be part of. That's when I figured out what I wanted my purpose to be. Because I didn't understand it before, Denise. I didn't understand what global development was.
But you didn't understand it academically, but your heart understood it. So this is the thing
Well,
about
and
passion. So that's where you want the understanding in your heart, and that's what happened. That nudged at your heart.
exactly.
Um, it's the common thing, you know. A lot of people want to work with the nonprofit sector. They want to go into these, challenging environments, and the very often the driver is, I'm coming to give you a fish. Well, what I
Mm-hmm.
love about what you're saying, listen, I am not here to give you a fish. I am here for us to figure out how to fish and how to
Right.
fish well.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing. That is what really makes a difference. So I've heard you mention the term in the past, triple win strategy. Triple win strategy. So
Right.
can you tell us what that means and what really is the strategy behind it?
Right. Absolutely. So this is a strategy that I have to say I learned over time. And I really learned through reflecting um, while I was implementing projects over time. And let me first tell you about the players. Okay. So when you're looking to put a proposal together and you're going to implement in another country, there are various players that we're looking at. So I'm going to lay out these players for you. So number one, there is normally a global nonprofit, right? Or a local nonprofit. And the nonprofit is the one that is bringing new learning skill sets, right? There's funding for technical assistance, training, curriculum, Sometimes there is pools of funding for seed capital, right, to start businesses or to give some of the training, through local resources or whatnot. Okay, so and usually that is a big actor that is funded through a government, a foundation, sometimes a combination. Can also be funded through corporate social responsibility through a corporation. Okay, so those are grants, right? Don't
Mhm.
intend to be paid back. They're like kind of a manager. The second player is usually private sector or a corporation. It can be global and it can be local. That is a corporation or private sector that is working in the community, and it needs raw materials from the community, right? And so it has a vested interest to make sure that those raw materials are well made so that it can increase its revenue potential. The third one is the local private sector. So it's your small, medium, and micro businesses, right, that are creating wealth locally. And then the last one is a player, but I don't count it in the three, and it's a government, because the government is cross-cutting, and it creates an enabling environment or it hinders what's happening. So those are really the three players, and then the cross-cutting government. Okay. So basically, what is the strategy? If you want a sustainable strategy for programs within vulnerable communities and emerging markets, you must disrupt a system. You must
Mm.
disrupt the system. And so to disrupt a system, right, you have to look at all of those players, right? The nonprofits and the corporations and for profits and the local for profits, and say, okay, what can we do together to disrupt this system to make sure that the vulnerable communities are not outside the system, that they're actually inside the system? Because what I learned over time is that the reason they are in fact vulnerable is because they've been left outside the system. And so if
Mhm.
you map out the vulnerable community in whatever country you're in Nigeria, right? You're in Uganda, you're in Nepal, you're in Ecuador, map it out and say, okay, where are these players and where is our community and what have they been left out of, right? That's why you bring these players together. And then you identify where is it that they've been left out of. And that's where you have to start challenging. And that's why you need all the players at the table. Okay. And if we do have time, I can also share an example with you of one time when we were able to actually do that.
Hmm. I like the idea. I like how you have sort of categorized, the various sectors and what you're saying about, for sustainability, you
Mm-hmm.
need to disrupt a system because it seems like polar opposites. And it does remind me of one of the sayings, I think is, I can't remember the guy who said it, but it is this thing about sometimes what gets in the way is the
Mm-hmm.
way.
Exactly. Yeah,
What
I love
gets in the
that. That's
way,
exactly right. You're right.
yes, what gets in the way is the way. So it's like you want sustainability, but you
Mhm.
first have to disrupt
That's
systems
right.
to get that sustainability. So that strategic approach is truly inspiring, Gretchen, and your journey really highlights the power of purpose driven work. you know um, but could you highlight for me maybe one project that you
Sure.
believe best represents the impact you aim to achieve through your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I am going to take you to Malawi. Okay. And in Malawi, where I was managing a global development alliance. Okay. And the Global Development Alliance was funded by the United States Agency for International Development. And by design, there was technical assistance funding from the US government, right? And this technical assistance funding was to work with dairy farmers that were organized in cooperatives, right? So they were dairy farmers, and in these cooperatives, they were provided through the funding. They were provided cooling tanks, right? Because it's a cold chain with dairy. So the milk was, taken at home and then brought to the cooperative and cooled to keep it cold, to keep it at good quality, and to bring more volume of dairy milk. General Mills, the global corporate social responsibility arm of General Mills Corporation from the United States, gave funding for the United States government to buy cows from South Africa, bring them to Malawi, and allowed us to crossbreed with the local cows so that the farmers and the cooperatives had cows that were higher yielding of dairy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there was more milk than there was before. And so the USAID funds allowed the project I was managing to help the farmers learn how to milk at a better quality. They had more milk, right? And so we cooled the milk, and the local dairy processor agreed to give all of the inputs like the medicine and whatnot that the farmers needed on credit, right? So that's the for-profit that needs to fill an issue in their value chain, right? That's their skin in the game, right, Denise? Mm-hmm. And so they give it in advance, and then they deduct it out of their milk sales, right? So that was an issue within the value chain. The CSR was filling an issue in the value chain, which we didn't have enough volume milk. And at the end of the day, we took some of the funding from USAID, and we helped to create a seed fund to set up local businesses so that they could provide mobile veterinary services as well as local feed manufacturing and tick services for the cows, all of which kept them healthier and producing more milk. And that, in fact, number one, it raised the income for the farmers because they produced more milk, right? Mm-hmm. Number two, it also created more wealth in the system. So as you create more wealth in the system for the farmers, there was also more wealth created for that dairy processor locally, the for-profit private sector. And so we created more wealth for basically everyone in the sector. And at the end of the day, we were able to leave in 2.5 years. The program was Excellent. Actually sustainable. It was sustainable. So it wasn't a development program in which you had to get extra funding for another 2.5, 3.5, 5 years. So when you look at it systematically, when you've got all the players in the room, when you talk about how you can help each player all gain wealth at the end of the day, that's sustainable. But when you only have one player getting what they need out of it at the end of the day, it's not sustainable at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love that concept. So that's sort of related to all the where everybody wins, everybody wins strategy. Because in a lot of cases, a lot of large organizations I have found, they disguise, oh, we want to have a social impact, but really it's only if it suits their interests and their targets. That's right. Okay, I'll have a social impact if I can show that something that I have produced has reached 10,000 homeless people. But then when you really get down, they're only concerned with that figure of 10,000. When you get beneath the surface, they haven't really
Mhm.
created a sustainable kind of system to address
Right.
homelessness. Yeah, so
Right.
I do get that. So
So
it's
what
clear
KPI
that
did they use, right? They use their own KPI. But if you
it,
use holistic key performance indicators, they're in trouble.
exactly, that's the thing. And that's what I like about what you're saying, that it's not just your KPI that matters.
Right.
When if you really want sustainability, you really have to include everybody's
Yeah.
KPIs.
And
That's
and
it's so
everybody really appreciates it at the end of the day as well because it really does take everybody's interests in consideration.
yes, yes. Yeah, it's really interesting because, in my own work, I know I've been doing some work with inner city young people
Mhm.
and around, social mobility. And what
Mhm.
I have found, there are some young people, what's getting in the way is the way for them because they don't have the resources to access a lot of the programs, and then they can't participate in the initiative because they don't have the resources. But providing them with the resources is not part of the KPI of the organizations that's helping. So it's really
Right.
I think it's a common challenge that people have. So it's clear that your projects, though, have not only change lives, because for what you've described, what you've done in Malawi, but it has really, I think, set a precedent of what's possible in social impact. So, reflecting on your career for a minute, can you again give me a defining moment that you think, okay, this really shaped my path? Would it be that Malawi project, or there's another that this really shaped my path for making a difference?
Well, I definitely think my PR experience was a blessing, and I am very, very grateful that that I was guided to make that decision. First of all, the second I would say was that when I returned from PR, I went to the School for International Training, and it was a great decision because I had 2 years with people who had already had an experience, right? They had already worked for at least 2 years in some type of international setting, right? Doing different types of development work, whether it be education, right? Working with vulnerable communities, in healthcare, in gosh, they were just different, economic growth, right? Environmental, lots of different areas. And I learned so much that I never could have learned had I been in a master's degree. Like, I always call it my alternative MBA because I learned what multicultural integration was really all about. I learned that when you look at proposals, right? When you look at budgets, there are so many things that are hidden between the lines.
Yeah,
You can be a normal MBA student, but it's all the things between the lines that when you go to implement that are much more important. And so I believe what I actually learned was more about execution. We fast tracked putting it all together, which was the easy part. It was, how are you actually going to figure out how to execute this? And I
mm,
think that was what was really valuable because when I went to go do that, I feel like I was so much farther ahead than anyone else. And it had to do with those questions. It had to do with not making assumptions because I had people in the room telling me, look, you're 20 years my junior. Ask the question. And I was so appreciative of being told that, even in that way. I was so appreciative. And I will never forget, people telling me that, remember, you may be the leader, but you don't know more than the person sitting next to you. So,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. So,
everyone brings something to the table.
Yeah. So I
Mm-hmm.
honestly would say that those foundational pieces stay with me every single day of my life. And I
Mm.
would say the only other thing is that I had the gift of taking my family with me on my first 16 years abroad, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Excellent. So, in my dealings with leaders, and, I've had the privilege to be in conversation with very senior people, both in government, in nonprofit sector, in royalty, all of that. And there's something that I found that's common to a lot of these influential leaders, that they have a philosophy, a leadership philosophy. I say a mantra that drives them. What would you say is yours, and what do you think shaped that philosophy, Fee?
Mm, okay. Well, I would say most most people won't remember what you've said. Most people won't remember what you've done, but they will remember how you've made them feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think my mantra has become, and this is learned, right? I didn't know this right away. I think this is learned. I believe now definitely that I want to be able to lead in a way that I want people to feel the way I want to feel being led by a leader, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm going to remember, and that's what I think people are going to remember about me.
Mm. So you want people to feel the way you would feel if you were being led. So
That's
that's
right.
it's a constant thing of putting yourself in their place, in the place of
Absolutely.
the people you're
Yes.
leading. So, what advice then would you give to um, early career leaders? They're just setting out on this journey of leadership, impactful leadership. What advice would you give?
Yeah. Um, well, I think there's various things to keep in mind. I think number one, your voice matters. Your voice matters. I know sometimes it can feel very scary, right? To raise your hand and to say what you think, because people are worried. You are worried, right? What people will think. But I think we are at a time in history where people, at least those that matter,
Hmm.
will really appreciate hearing what your thoughts are, right? And I think if you respect others, people will absolutely respect you and your thoughts. And if people don't, leave them behind, right? So share your thoughts. Absolutely share your thoughts and don't worry about what others think. I think that that's one thing that holds young people and youth back. And I don't want that to hold people back. I have three daughters and I talk with them quite a lot because that held me back, right? The worry about what others would think. Don't let it hold others back, right? Um, and the other is, and I wish I had done more of this, right? So this is why I'm sharing this one. Um, Stop and reflect more often than you think you should, because
Hmm.
there are
More
lessons.
often than you think you should.
Yeah, there are more lessons in everything than you think. And I, we all learn that as we get older, right, Denise?
Hmm.
we, I
Yeah.
know, right? There's wisdom. There's wisdom in their words. There's wisdom in that, and I just gave a talk the other day, and it really was about being present, like be present when someone is asking you the same thing over and over, maybe in different words. Listen for the intent, right? Because maybe they're not
Mm,
asking you outright, but they're trying to tell you something. Be present and reflect, because the sooner you can learn what they call active listening, which is really being present and listening for intent, the sooner you will honestly be able to climb your professional ladder. Because that's really important, and that's the, emotional intelligence that we struggle with when we're younger. And so the sooner you can master your own emotions, and
mm.
doing that through reflective, active listening, the sooner you are going to bypass the other youth that are around you. So those are the
I
conversations
love
I
that.
have with my daughters on a daily basis. And they listen sometimes.
Yeah, power of reflection. Listening to you, Gresham, about your triple win strategy, you talked about the importance of not only focusing on your own KPIs, the KPI of the people you are also trying to make a difference with. I think there is a very strong theme of community and collaboration in what you're saying. And I think in the world that we're living in, community and collaboration, it's a no-brainer. We have to have that to make a difference in the world. But there are many other challenges facing our world. We have the climate change, we have some big issues: climate
Yeah,
change, global shortage of skills, and all of those things.
we do.
Private sector investment, local enterprises. But what, from in your opinion, are the biggest challenges you think facing the nonprofit sector today? And how can, emerging leaders prepare to address them?
That's a great question, Denise. There are very significant challenges today. Um, and I think coming out of COP28 in Davos, they are reaching a tipping point, definitely. I believe that it is that partnership and collaborative approach, and it is the integration of strategies and funding sources that's going to make the difference. There is no way that we can tackle issues like, um, carbon emissions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like our sanitation issues, right? Like the conflict that refugees are facing, right? Like the number of children who are malnourished and
Mm-hmm.
dying today because they are displaced due to being refugees, due to conflict, right? At the Horn of Africa or in the Sudan, or due to conflicts in Gaza, right? And all of these, there's just no way that the United Nations, even the World Bank, they can't take these on alone. We are going to have to prioritize, and we're going to have to work together to 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 make even dents in these bigger issues. And what what I love about global development work, and why I think that global development can really be a core and a hub for making some change, right? Some real change in these challenging issues going forward, is because global development work really does, as you say, reach the most vulnerable, right? And these places where there's such devastation and poverty, like we have boots on the ground, right? So now the question is, how do we integrate those other services? Because there is expertise, right? But how do we now integrate and work together to, how do we close the digital divide, right? How do we work with internet providers? How do we work with energy providers? How do we work with those private sector that bring sanitation and water, right? And hygiene and mobile clinics, right? And animal husbandry and fertilizers, right? And work with the soil. How do we bring all that together to the people who are in these places to create livelihoods, right? How do we work together?
Mhm.
We need to do more of what you were talking about, the partnership and the collaboration. So if we
Mhm.
continue to work in silos, we will not be able to make dents in these challenges. But if we
No.
do some focusing, right, and we tackle it together, we can make some change happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In a world that's changing, we if we continue to do the things the way we have always done it, like you said, we're not going to make dents in anything. And in a
Yeah.
world that's constantly changing, we don't have a choice. We have to allow our leadership to evolve. That that is the only answer. So, how in this continuing evolving leadership, it's that
Hmm.
you agree it's really essential,
Hmm.
and your approach is testament to that you're very aware of it and you're
Hmm.
aware that you have to change. You have to change because the world isn't static, so our leadership can't be static. But how do you think focusing on increasing happiness and purpose at work can translate into productivity?
Oh,
Because
absolutely.
yeah, how will it translate into productivity?
Oh. How do you translate? Let me just make sure I understood. So, how do you translate happiness and purpose into productivity?
Yes, because listening,
Oh,
I think listening to you, you're agreeing that the world is changing. We cannot
it
work
is.
in silos. We have to collaborate. We have to work in community.
Yes.
We have to consider the KPIs of
Yes.
everybody, and we have
Mhm.
to take time to reflect, learn lessons in order to propel ourselves forward.
Yeah.
And making people purposeful in what they're doing, and
Right.
leading from the heart is really important.
Right.
But then you still have people saying, okay, well, how does that affect the bottom line? So I
Right.
would be
Mhm.
interesting to know from in your opinion, how do you think if as leaders we
Mhm.
focus more on purpose driven and value based leadership, where we're concerned about the happiness of the people we're leading, how they feel,
Yeah.
how would that translate into productivity?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so. First of all, um, include everyone. So, one of the first things that I've seen is that people cut corners, right? So that they can do the work as quick as possible, right? Efficiency, right? So let's just be efficient. Let's just get it done, right? And I've even noticed that on some of the calls I've been having, some of the calls are 15 minutes even, which is okay, get to the point, we're done. But there isn't any, hi, how are you? How is your day? Like, we've cut all of that out anymore. And you know what? That's a big part of the human connection. Just like being able to say, how are you? Being able to
Yes.
connect. And that's a big part of really caring about people and being human, right? So, number one, okay, and this is a big part of my leadership strategy, and it wouldn't matter whether I'm working with the nonprofit, the for profit sector, if they're both in a room with me, which I have them both in a room with me very frequently, right, when I'm working, which is make everybody part of the process, right? It doesn't mean everybody has to be in every meeting, but make everybody part of what is your North Star, right? What is the North Star? What is our actual goal going to be? Make sure everybody has buy into that, everybody's voice. Everybody can actually see their voice in that North Star. And then make sure everybody understands the tasks they're doing. How do they contribute to actually meeting the North Star? and then celebrate. I don't know how many times I've actually been working with corporations and nonprofits that actually say, okay, we did great. Everybody go home. And I'm like, can't we at least congratulate everybody on meeting this goal? And like, let's have a cake or go out for drinks, or let's just sit together on the Zoom call and congratulate each other. We need to celebrate, right? We need to congratulate each other, and we need to tell each other we've done a really, really good job. I think we're missing that. I think that joy has started to go away because we have replaced it with, we want to be efficient, right? We want work-life balance, and so I'm going to balance it by just cutting everything, right? And I think there should be just an agreement between teams of employees of how you want to spend your time, but you have to celebrate. And sometimes it's the little wins that mean the most, right? Do you know when I'm happiest, Denise? I am happiest when I can go to the field and I have a child walk up to me and say, Madame, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for coming to see us.
Yes, those little things matter.
I wanted to meet you because we have water now, because we have a new cow, because I saw you in a picture and I just wanted to meet you. And like that fulfills me, right? And so whenever I'm feeling down, I get on a plane and I go and I see who I'm working with, and that reminds me. So that's my joy.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing. It's those little things that matter, you know. One of the programs we run is we equip employees to work with young people, growing leaders, because leadership is the core of what we do. And it's really interesting at the end when you talk to the mentors, the things that move them the most is when a child comes up and says,
Yeah.
thank you, I learned so much. Thank you for giving up your time. You know,
know.
and it just wipes away all the negativity and the fretting. Oh, this is too difficult.
Yeah.
Just that, to see that you have actually impacted a human being, it makes a difference. Well, you know, Gretchen, your strategies are incredibly insightful. But before we wrap up, I wonder if you have any final thoughts or messages you'd like to share with our audience about leadership or social impact or finding one's path to making a meaningful difference. Because you've definitely found yours. So what can you share with our audience as to how to go about finding theirs?
Yeah. Well, I would just say, give yourself experiences. You
Mm,
really don't know um, in your youth what you really want to do, right? None of us do, right? Give yourself grace. You don't have to know what you want to do, but give yourself experiences of everything. And through those experiences, you will learn what you like and what you want to do. And, you know, whether it's an international experience or just experiences within the United States with, with volunteer experiences, church experiences, with organizations like Denise's, which are fantastic. There's all kinds of opportunities, but, you know, do not keep yourself from being part of different communities. I'm part of one called the Impact Table, which is an organization online, right? So you can do them virtually as well, of women of all age ranges working in social impact, for profit and nonprofit, where we share different stories with one another. And I learn quite a lot. I get mentored by younger women and peers, and I mentor others as well. The social impact world is another one for only for profits and corporations. There's lots of opportunities out there. So just give yourself experiences, and through that, just be open and keep your mind open. That would be what I would say. And, if you are interested in learning more about kind of a systems approach, I would say my superpower really is looking at gaps within systems. Um, Please do reach out to me. I'm definitely open for a conversation, and would be, more than happy to talk with you.
Well, Gresham, thank you for sharing your wisdom, experiences, and insights with us today. Not many of us have been able to find what really rocks our boat, our passion, but you have identified it. And what the advice you've just given, that, give yourself experience, is
Hmm.
so important, because that's where you will find
Right.
your superpower, like you said, because it's what I have found. Whatever you find whatever your hands find to do, do your best work. Whatever you get, wherever you're getting that experience, and in that, you will find your best work.
That's right.
That's what I've discovered. And your dedication to social impact and leadership is truly inspiring. And we're grateful for the work that you're doing. And it's good to have someone in the world with that superpower, identifying gaps in the systems. Because we live in a world with many gaps. And sometimes we're operating at this level when in fact we can operate at that level if we can bridge those gaps. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. To our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this episode of The Lead Mindset. We hope today's conversation with Gretchen Villegas has inspired you to pursue your path with purpose, passion, and resilience. Until next time.